Welcome to Deer University, the podcast of the Mississippi State University Deer Lab. I'm Bronson Strickland.
And I'm Steve Damaris. We're both lifelong hunters, deer biologists, professors of wildlife management, and co-directors of the MSU Deer Lab. We explain the latest research, including our own work and that conducted elsewhere.
So if you're interested in deer biology and management, this is your podcast. Every decision you make is a step in your management program, and we give you the knowledge to make every decision count. Welcome back to the Deer University podcast. This is Bronson Strickland.
And I'm Steve Damaris.
Steve, there you are. There you are.
Yes, sir.
Good to see you.
Good to see you, man.
Well, Steve, this is it's a good episode we're about to record. It's one that I knew was coming for some time, but we have yet to really, officially make an announcement. And so we thought it would be a good opportunity for you and I to visit and talk about what changes are going on in your life and where you're at now and what the future holds.
Yeah, it's bittersweet, Bronson. It's been a great, wonderful journey the last 25, 26 years since we've worked together on deer issues. It's just been wonderful. But even the most wonderful things have at some point change. And so, some people have heard that I've retired last summer, and I'm still, involved in the Deer Lab and podcasting and such. But I have made some major changes in my life. Grandkids have been calling me. In the deer vernacular, I've been baited into the Dallas-Fort Worth area by two grandchildren. I wouldn't have probably come in for my kids, but my grandkids. I have three kids. One's in Austin, one's in Dallas, and one's in DC. So I wasn't going to go one place just based on a child and their spouse. But now that I have three grandsons and two of them here in Dallas. So the majority rule is, I'm going to retire, and I just wanted to get near grandkids.
Yeah, that's good. I'm glad you did. So they did the equivalent of putting a corn spinner in the Dallas area, and it drew you in.
That's right. That's right. I am now in Arlington, Texas, home of Jerry's World. 4 miles down a main road out of my community, and there's this big, looks like one of these big spaceships out of some science fiction movie.
Oh,
Jerry's
yeah.
World just kind of arises. But it's different. It's starkly different from Starkville.
I bet it is. Climate would be similar, though, I guess.
Yeah, probably 15 inches less rain. We're at this, Dallas. By the time you get through Dallas-Fort Worth, on the other side, you're in some pretty low rainfall belts.
Right.
And you're getting into, mesquite, some western cedars and things like that, and grasses and some shrubs, scrub shrubs and things like that. So it's a lot different on the west side of the DFW area than it is on the eastern side ecologically.
Not near as much loblolly pine.
Not near as much, no. That's pretty much kind of left behind you in the piney woods of East Texas.
Yeah. Well, let's be honest, Steve. You retired in place many years ago.
That was my plan.
But you officially retired here back in, it was June of 24, correct?
Yes. Yeah. And so it's 8-9 months now. And I honestly tried, my approach was to tap the brakes for several years, quite a few years, to try to start slowing down, because I'd seen so many faculty members that retired and they still had like 3 or 4 graduate students and projects they had to, finish up, and they were stressed out and having to come back and continue to work. And I was trying to not have that happen to my students or to myself, and give myself a year or two to kind of write those papers that I never got around to writing because you're too busy doing. Um, but then, things happen when we're such a successful research entity that, money that we weren't even trying to find, we weren't asking anybody for money. Money just kind of shows up, and, you need to do things to help out people that need information. And so I ended up not tapping the brakes as hard as I thought I would. And the joke by some of my students, well, Luke Resop was officially my last student, but he was my sixth last student. I had five previous last students before them. And I think they just joked, "Oh, you're his third." Oh, no, I was his, yeah, I was his second. Oh, you're his fourth. It was just a process that you have to go through.
And it was hard for you to say no, because I remember when you spend your career looking for opportunities, and then
Mm-hmm.
you finally reach a point to where you don't have to take advantage of it. Not only are you not looking for opportunities, you don't even have to say yes to those opportunities, but you're so used to it that when those opportunities presented themselves, I think it was just a reaction for you to do it and to take advantage of it.
Yeah, and there's a couple of positives there. One is I get to continue working with really bright, motivated young people that want to learn and contribute to the profession. And I got to stay involved with you as a co leader in the research, and continue with the all the outreach stuff. And so it was the best job a person could imagine having as a wildlife professor, in my opinion. And so I got to continue doing it. And I got to also help the agencies that we've been helping all the way along that have issues. So we generate new knowledge and provide them with options
Mm-hmm.
for them to consider using. So, I'm a uh, I like I'm a highly motivated, and I like positive reinforcement, and getting solutions that are usable and used by people is really rewarding. So it's hard to let that go.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, hey, I wanted to maybe take a little stroll down memory lane while we're here, and maybe talk to you about what are some things that you are most proud of, accomplishment wise. And
Hmm.
we, of course, I can put some of the words in your mouth. The single most important thing are the students,
Hmm.
and the lives that you've influenced, and watching them ascend in the profession. That is the single most gratifying thing you can ever accomplish.
Hmm.
So let's acknowledge that, and maybe move towards some of the topics that over the years that you think maybe had the biggest influence, or maybe some things that maybe weren't of great influence at all, but things you were very proud of doing, things that
Hmm.
interested you a lot.
Okay. Okay. Well, chronologically, uh, when I came to Mississippi State in 1997, one of the big issues was pine management. And, pines, loblolly pine is, like the, in the Southeast is the equivalent of wheat in the northern prairies, and oats. And I mean, so it's everywhere, and it's a highly managed system with users, hunters that lease land from the timber companies. And so they're highly motivated to learn about deer and want the timber companies to do good by them because they're paying money to hunt so it was a great opportunity to impact a system that is widespread throughout the eastern United States and southeast in particular with loblolly. So I really enjoyed and felt good about uh, learning a lot about pine management and how we can integrate deer management into that system because it's an intensively managed land use.
So what were your take homes with that? There was if I remember correctly, there was an intervention, a potential management intervention at planting, but then also there was an intervention at mid rotation, and both
Yeah,
of those would influence deer populations.
yeah. The chronologically, well, actually they happened kind of about the same time, but the biggest research project that started early in my Mississippi career was site preparation. And this was the case where, you know, timber companies back then, they were using fairly large clear cuts, and, they might lease 300 or 400 acres of land to a group of hunters. And then they might come in and clear cut 200 acres of that. Uh, and all of a sudden, half the leased land disappears. And they come in and do site prep, which, if it's pines are a crop. And when we drive by a field of soybeans or a field of cotton or a field of corn, you don't see a lot of weeds out there. You see the crop. And that's all you see. And that's because the most efficient, productive way to maximize productivity of a plant is to eliminate all its competition. And so when a pine company, a timber company wants to grow pines quickly and you know, well, if they want to do a good job of growing pines, they want to try to minimize competition. So they were using site preparation herbicides. So that was a big issue. And I remember at one of our uh, annual Southeast Deer Study Group meetings, and give me some kind of sign, Bronson, if I'm rambling too much, because this is a wide open thing. I've got over 40 years of career that I could ramble about, so I'll try not
Ramble
to
on,
do that.
Steve. Ramble on.
Uh, but I remember going to a deer study group meeting in one of the eastern states in the southeast, and there were uh, hunters picketing one of the big corporate offices of a timber company in that state, and it was just like this big deal. Hunters were pissed because timber companies were cutting down the trees that were part of their leases and then coming back and sterilizing the ground and just growing pines, and what happened to this deer habitat. So the industry, by way of their uh, a funding source that they all contribute to, the National Council on Air and Stream Improvements, they came to us and said, hey, we need information about how this system of site preparation can be tweaked, if need be, to benefit also white-tailed deer. And we looked at birds, we looked at small mammals, we looked at some herps, some reptiles, and but the driving force was deer. And the interesting thing, we created a range of intensity of very low herbicide, essentially none, uh, and then all the way up to a lot of herbicide, so that we could look at different levels of herbicides. But we also had mechanical treatments with and without chemicals. And so we had this range of 5 treatments. And the cool thing, and you never know uh, just what you're going to learn when you do science. That's one of the cool things about this career that we do is I remember the first year, the wildlife agencies were really wanting the answers to this. And so we hosted a field tour on a year after it was implemented. And I stood in front of the mechanical only treatment. This was done in South Mississippi. It was mechanical only, mechanical site prep, no herbicides. And uh, to me, it looked great. There's all kinds of rubus and honeysuckle and just all kinds of good viney browse growing behind me as I was talking to him. And I said, to me, this mechanical only is the best of all the 5 treatments we're going to look at here today. And be careful what you say without full data, because our plan was to create a sampling scheme to capture those leaves and look at the nutritional content. And when we did that, we found that all that browse was and we sampled in July, which in Mississippi is peak fawning season and therefore, moving forward from there is peak lactation and a nutritionally demanding time of the year. Well, not only could those plants not sustain gestation, they couldn't sustain lactation. They barely maintained or sustained an animal just living with a 7% crude protein intake. So it was not good at all. And here I am, big deer professor saying, "Oh, this is clearly the best treatment." And no, it wasn't. And so that was one of those aha moments that you have in your career. Uh, wow, I thought I knew what I knew, but I didn't know what I didn't know. And we learned uh, and continued through I think 9 years of post planting monitoring that in the lower quality soil regions, browse is not good for deer. It's the forbs, the non-woody broadleaf weeds that are the higher protein content.
So you had an abundance of browse, and the appearance was, because I have all this green vegetation out there, it's got to be good for deer.
Yes.
But it was plant composition that was really important. So you had an abundance of vegetation, but
Yes.
the quality of it was very low and insufficient.
Yeah, and a lot of times, we've talked on this podcast and past issues about all that's green is not deer food, but this was deer food. I mean, this was all good deer food from our collective experiences, and that's why I thought it was the best treatment. But the quality of that deer food was so low. So that was a good learning lesson for us and me in particular. And what we learned from that study to kind of summarize a very extensive long-term study is the mid-range herbicide treatments were actually the most beneficial to deer. Moderate herbicide application to control the low-quality brush that naturally come in those soil regions, and then that would allow the herbaceous plants, the broadleaf weeds that are higher quality to grow. And so the middle herbicide treatment level was actually the most nutritionally beneficial to the deer.
So you gave up blackberry, but you gained pokeweed.
Yeah.
You got pokeweed and ragweed and stuff like that.
Yep.
But you chemically had to add that level of control to suppress the growth of the rubus or the blackberry and woody, viney stuff like that.
Yeah. The stuff that in other regions with better quality soil are acceptable to support life requirements for deer, but in this lower quality soil region, it just didn't cut it. Yeah. And if the mamas can't raise good healthy babies, your antlers are going to be harmed moving forward. So that was an important lesson, and we also learned that within 5 years and 6 for sure, the canopy cover is taking place, so the food goes away anyway.
Yeah.
So you've got a short time frame to manage for nutrition in a clear cut system.
Mm-hmm. So it all depends on the area and the patchwork on the landscape as to how positive or negative that would be.
That's
Meaning,
right.
if you had a really large area and that was a couple hundred acres, whether it be in one block or spread out over, that couple thousand acres, no big deal. But if you're on an area where that took up, like some of these hunting clubs, and us looking at DMAP over the years, you've got some of these clubs where that might be a great proportion of their hunting land, then that's a really big deal and potentially devastating for a few years.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we got that project started up in the early 2000s. And around that time, we were also starting to experiment with, again, herbicide and fire in mid-rotation pines. And so we had, one of our early graduate students, Scott Edwards, as an undergrad, was working with me on a property where we were doing mid-rotation management with thinning some trees out and then coming in and using the herbicide to remove the undesirable hardwoods and then fire to stimulate forbs, and showed 3 to 9-fold increase in the nutritional carrying capacity in mid rotations. So those two topics, and there were other mid rotation management studies and other students and all that, but putting it all together, pine management is a system that is extensive across the landscape, and it's going to be there. We have to know how to best manage it. And for private landowners, we've clearly showed them how they can do that. And then timber companies, we've informed them so they can make their optimization decisions and really produce the best quality deer habitat if they want to on their land, to address the nutritional needs of deer, whatever time of the year it is that is critical in that region.
It was this would be obvious to an ecologist long before this research, but this was when it really became meaningful to me because typically we're dealing with either industrial land or private landowners that were growing forests, pine forests, etc. And what became apparent to me for a teaching moment was it was so obvious with this research, especially when we were doing the mid-story stuff, is posing the question to the landowner or to the hunting group, etc., is how do you want to allocate sunlight? Because you are going to get a product from that. How you allocate the sunlight is going to produce a product. Is it the product that you want? And so none of this is a right or wrong. It's all right or wrong relative to your objectives. And if your objective is to maximize timber production, then you need to minimize competition and grow pine trees. But the people that you and I work with most often, they're either wanting a middle ground, or they might be, and I'm seeing this more and more now, where timber markets are not as good, the income derived from it is not as good. And so we're seeing a shift with a lot of people that they want to maximize deer quality or deer and turkey and things like that. And it tells a really interesting story. And I think once you get with someone in the field and you talk them through this, of sunlight is producing vegetation, and is that vegetation community consistent with what you want as a landowner?
Yeah. And that's key. It's critical.
Yeah.
And, and we've got 27 years here to talk about, so I can't talk about everything, but the pine trees were really, really important early on, and managing that pine system has stayed pretty consistent as a part of our, collective research in the Deer Lab, and up to the point where our last student, Luke Resop, was still doing fire in pines. And we had multiple students along the way that were looking at prescribed fire. Rainer Nichols comes to mind before Luke. How do we best apply that valuable tool to a pine system to produce nutrition when deer need it? So, the timing of the fire, and whether it's a backfire or a head fire, and all kinds of things. Yeah. Return interval and things like that. So, we haven't solved every question along the way, but we made some great progress because of great support, great landowners that allowed us access to their properties, and great students and great minds overseeing the project.
Who are you talking about?
Yeah, I lost my train of thought.
Yeah.
But yeah, we did some great things with the big sticks sticking up in the air.
Yeah. Well, what else comes to mind?
Well, chronologically, back in the day, when I came here to from Texas, I was at Texas Tech before I came to Mississippi State in 1997. One of the first things that then the wildlife, the deer guy for the state agency said, we need to do something with this DMAP data. We've been collecting DMAP data. Mississippi State started the DMAP program for the whole region. And we've got years and years of data and hundreds of thousands of deer data points, and we need to learn something from it. And I said, okay. And that led to a really, really critical, probably the best single decision I've ever made is to hire you to come in and start digging into that data. And I think you started in 1998, was it?
1998. That's right.
Yep. Uh, and you dug and turned that into a dissertation. And man, it's we haven't looked back. We look to the
Yeah.
side every once in a while, make sure no deer crossing the road ahead of us. But man, it's been a sweet, sweet ride the
Yeah, it
last
has.
27 years.
Yeah, we learned a lot from that, and we're still learning stuff. But if I were to frame it up, and we don't have all the answers. I mean, there's still so many things. I mean, you could build your entire career on just that DMAP data set and
Mm-hmm.
asking questions. The data are there. But I think at the time, what was really unique with it was looking at the spatial variation in
Mm-hmm.
deer herds and really trying to quantify what is the cause and effect of which. Again, I'm setting you up here for some research that indirectly came of this, but it was like initially we're quantifying why these different regions of the state have bigger deer than
Mm-hmm.
others. And then us coming up with explanations that we think this is the reason. There's a lot of support for why this is the reason. But then that moved towards, well, why can't we have big deer everywhere in the state? Why can't, if you're in the lower coastal plain of Mississippi, why can't you have as big a deer you have in the delta of Mississippi? Which that led into, well, then it's, much to our chagrin and disappointment, I think most people looked at it as, well, there's obviously genetic differences. And we and others, our colleagues at MDWF&P, are saying, deer are a product of the environment, and the environment is different and is probably based on food restriction, et cetera, et cetera. But a lot of people really were determined that, no, it's got to be a genetic difference. And the way to solve that is to start translocating deer.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to take them from the Delta region and turn them loose in the lower coastal plain, and the deer will be just as big. So that led us into another 10 years of our
Yep.
careers looking at that question.
Yeah, and there was so many different ways we kind of started looking at it in the big picture way. Is like, okay, what about those regions with the smaller deer differs between with the regions with the bigger deer, and that was a big part of your work, um, you know, and I know some of the timber people didn't like this result, but the lower coastal plain. The antler size was clearly associated with smaller antlers were clearly associated with more pine trees.
Absolutely.
Um, Now we were simultaneously learning that we could manage these pine trees better to improve the habitat, especially when it comes to mid-rotation. So we were learning, we learned that, a lot of pine trees is not necessarily good for deer habitat, but we learned how to improve that habitat for those that want to do it. Uh, but then, there's people that hear what they want to hear from research, and well, the deer are small there, so therefore we got to bring some deer in to fix the problem, and that led the agency, our state wildlife agency, to say, hey, we need to address this question: is it genetics or is it nutrition? And that led to what we call the Environment and Genetics Project.
Yeah.
We brought deer in from the lower coastal plain. We brought deer in from the Delta region, which is the high-end deer, which, we thought, well, that was our gold standard, our best deer we could grow. And then we went to a soil resource region that was kind of mid-range, middle-sized deer. And we brought them all to Mississippi State. We brought bred does from the wild, and they fawned, and we raised those fawns That was the first generation. We let them breed within their regions, their genetic sources, and produce second generation deer. We just monitored those, and I mean, literally, it was another 9 or 10 year project. Um, and the cool thing about it is we came up with a definitive answer. Uh, and we've talked about all these things on separate podcasts over the years, but back to your question, what are the things that come to mind when I think about my career? I mean, this was a big one, and we showed that the nutrition is the driving force for smaller bodied deer in regions that are historically produce smaller bodied deer, and it's not genetics. What we learned though is there's a process called, we didn't test for this, but our best explanation of what we observed was epigenetics, where the genetics are not necessarily different for body size and antler size, but the deer in the lower coastal plain have been living for generations and generations and generations on low quality soil that was growing low quality plants, and their genes for big bodies and big antlers are kind of turned off because it's not ecologically advantageous to grow a big body that you cannot maintain through regular intake of the proper quality of foods. So they just turn their genes off for big bodies and big antlers. And when we did that study, we fed the fawns and the mothers that we brought in that were pregnant, we fed them an optimum nutrition in our research facility. And so those fawns, the first generation, low quality region, grew bigger antlers than their predecessors harvested in the wild, but their body sizes were unchanged. And it wasn't until the second generation that the body size bumped up. And actually, the body size and the antlers jumped dramatically in the second generation. Now, I explain it, and it makes sense in my mind, is epigenetics is turned off genes because of long-term environmental conditions. And so if it's a long-term environmental condition that you're turning your genes off to deal with, just because you have a generation of good nutrition, you don't go turning those genes back on again because you grow some really big bodied deer and oops, we can't sustain ourselves. So now we got to, get half starved to death. So the epigenetics turns on slowly. It kind of is multi switches that have to be turned on. And I bet an engineer could describe this much better than I could.
You and me both. An evolutionary biologist could really describe it well.
Yeah.
But we're deer
But
biologists doing the best we
yeah,
can.
we do the best we can, and we've stumbled across some knowledge along the way.
Yeah.
But what we learned was improve the nutrition, but it's not a quick fix. Somebody that just thinks, "Oh, I'm gonna plant a new food plot crop this year. Oh, it's going to make a great improvement in my deer." No, it's not. Uh, or I'm going to put out a feeding program. Oh man, the deer antlers just jumped. Yeah, maybe. But it's a generational improvement. I like to say uh, generational improvements in nutritional intake lead to generational improvements in antlers and body size. So there's no quick fixes when it comes to habitat improvements or however you do your nutritional management.
Yeah.
It takes generations to get the switches back on. So we grew lower coastal plain deer, the low end deer in our state. We grew them as bigger bodied and bigger antlered as the wild harvested deer in the Delta. So it's not genetics.
But it took 2 generations to do
Took two
it.
generations. And I would have loved to do a third generation and see where we could go,
Mhm.
or a fourth generation. Uh, but there's limits to, finances and, the agency had their answer. So they
Right.
weren't going to just keep spending sportsmen's dollars on an interesting process. But back to the we showed the lower coastal plain deer could grow as big as wild harvested delta deer. Well, we also showed that the delta deer on 2 years of 2 generations of nutrition grew much bigger bodies and bigger antlers. And so our gold standard deer in the delta aren't nearly as big as they could be. So even our best region is still nutritionally limiting the deer.
Our gold standard was more like silver, not gold.
Yeah, yeah, maybe even silver plate. So it just blows my mind, Bronson. Uh, if landowners could do what we'd like them to do for long enough over a large enough scale of land, all these. Well, I mean, there's a lot of people that do stuff with deer breeding systems and controlled breeding, and they can grow huge antlers. Uh, but it's amazing to me what you could do in a natural system at scale over time to apply the things that we've learned and our other colleagues around the region. Um, just tweak it. Use the knowledge that you have, that I have, and our students have, and apply it long enough. They can produce some amazing deer.
Absolutely. And you said something a moment ago that probably deserves a little more emphasis is that the spatial scale to doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And the issue I see very often is what you're looking for is a population level response.
Mm-hmm.
So the system you're describing and the changes you're describing, we're not talking about an individual. We're
No.
talking about what's needed for an entire population. And unfortunately, what that necessarily means is you have to change your uh, population relative to food supply, abundance and quality of food at a really large spatial scale.
Mm-hmm.
And this is unfortunate, but this is kind of our jobs, is telling people that what can be accomplished and what can't be accomplished. And what really, really stinks is you can do the absolute best. You can do it by the book on 200 or 300 acres,
Mm-hmm.
but you're not going to see a population level response on 200 to 300 acres.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this needs to be done. And this is the power of cooperatives. A patchwork of landowners getting together and doing it over a scale of thousands of acres. And that is when you could start triggering this epigenetic response that you're talking about, is
Yep.
when you change the population level uh, food supply and quality of food. So
Yeah.
it's not individuals, it's a population scale.
Yeah. And on that 200 to 300 acres, you can, do it really well and have does that live and breed and raise their fawns on that 200 to 300 acres. But then those fawns, 70 to 80% of the bucks are going to go and move, several miles away and live there. And so you really need that cooperative venture of a lot of people rowing in the same direction, up the stream or down, across the lake. Everybody's rowing in the same direction,
Right.
improving the habitat. But that's, we've done episodes on small population management. It's not like you can't do things. You just can't necessarily have epigenetic changes in the population because you're not managing a population. But you can still do things that are going to improve the nutrition on your property and improve the attractiveness of your property to deer during the hunting season.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I did not say that in any way to discourage, management, because that is precisely what we recommend on small properties. It's just managing the expectations of you could do everything by the book on 200 acres, but you're not, like we documented with the research you're referring to, but you're not going to see a change of the average Boone and Crockett score increased by 28 inches.
That's right.
You're just not going to see that at that spatial scale.
Yeah. So, yeah. So you know, what we do, what I think drives both of us, Bronson, and our students is to learn knowledge, put it into context, and then, and help through that context explain to people why and how it matters to them. And there's so many, one of the problems as I'm leaving, the active profession, like I'm thinking, well, what kind of tidbit could I leave behind? And one tidbit is there's a lot of facts about deer management and deer ecology, deer habitat, and there's all kinds of social. What do you call those people on Instagram? So what do you call those again?
Influencers?
Influencers, social influencers. Thank you. People probably know that you dragged me into this whole social media thing and podcasting in particular. Um, but social media influencers that love to give you a 30-second something to fix whatever. And there's no such thing as that in deer management. There's no single best food plot. There's no single best food plant. There's no single, I mean, even something as great as prescribed fire. We don't recommend you just go out and burn your whole property. You don't even, you burn parts and different times of the year and different backfire versus headfire. I mean, it's all kinds of tidbits that are the minutia of deer management. And so don't think you can listen to a social influencer for 30 or 40 seconds and figure something out about your property. It can't happen. What you need is to take as much of that, for the hunters and landowners that aren't deer ecologists, take as much of this information as you can and apply it in cooperation, maybe with a local state agency biologist or other landowners, and work through the process. It's long-term, generational, and there's no simple fix, and you need help.
Yeah.
And I guess don't listen to the 30-second quick fix social influencers.
It's a marathon, not a sprint.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. So, we've got a lot more projects we could talk about. One of the most fun projects that had no practical application at all.
I know what you're about to say.
You and me and Randy DeYoung used to, kind of debate / argue for years about whether or not female white-tailed deer had a choice in who they bred. And I said, she's going to be bred by whoever's standing behind her when she's in receptive heat. She doesn't, choice doesn't matter. But you two, more ecologically in tuned, would say,
why would it not matter to a mother who is the father of her offspring? She is the one responsible for all of the parental care. She has so much to gain, so much to lose. So why would she not care? Not that deer care per se, but why would they not be interested in having the highest quality father for their offspring?
yeah,
That was the question we posed.
yep. And, I couldn't argue with that question. It was a very darn good question. It should matter. But we had to wait around a while before we had a chance to answer that question. And the question, the funding for this project came about because the State Wildlife Agency needed a certain tool to estimate fawning dates of fetuses. And so we had to develop that for them. And in the process, we had an opportunity to have controlled breeding and thus a doe that's in estrus today or tomorrow or the day before yesterday or whatever. We had a series of does in estrus. And so we thought we could finally test this. Does she have a preference and what is it? So we had, Dan Marino was our graduate student for that project. And he showed clearly that they do have a preference and it's the size of the antlers that matter. They didn't have a preference for the age of the bucks. They didn't have a preference for the size of the bucks.
The body
It
size.
was, yeah, the body size. It was just the antler size that mattered to them. And it was a very, very quantitative, extensive effort that we did, that Dan led, and clearly proved uh, size matters for antlers.
Well,
Um,
here's my take on that.
mhm.
Is the antlers did matter. Antler size did matter. But I think we ought to put in context as well. We weren't comparing, I'll just use Boone and Crockett's score as our measure here. We weren't comparing a 120 inch versus a 130 inch,
Mhm.
or an average 135 inch versus a 150 inch.
Yeah.
We compared the extremes.
Yep.
So it was a 150, 160 relative to a 90. So it was
Yeah.
two very, very. And so I would qualify something you said of age didn't matter. The way I interpreted our results is that antlers are a shortcut to age,
Yeah.
meaning that there is a very instantaneous signal that if a buck has 130, 40, 50 inches of antler, then automatically that is going to be a 3 or 4 or 5-year-old buck.
Yeah.
So it's an honest signal of the
Yep.
buck's age and quality that a doe can instantaneously perceive, from antler size.
Yeah. Absolutely. But when and the reason, and nobody had in the world had ever done this project before because it was difficult to do logistically, and yeah, it was just difficult to do. And we had to figure out how to go about doing it, but we were able to separate out uh, body size, antler size, and age because they're all correlated. Smaller bodied deer are younger deer. Younger deer have smaller antlers. As they get older, they get bigger bodies and they get bigger antlers, generally speaking. So it was this all three things happening simultaneously, but we were able to split them out. And I won't ramble 10 minutes explaining the study design, but we were able to split out age. We were able to split out body size and be able to split out antlers. And that's why I was saying it wasn't body size, it wasn't age, it was the antler size. But again, yeah, they're all correlated, but nobody in the world had ever done this study to say which is of those three things is the most uh, important to the female when she is in estrus.
Yeah.
And that was the cool thing too. It wasn't about just who am I going to hang around with in the woods, but who am I going to get bred by?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So,
and yeah, you're right. We can't go into great detail, but for people that aren't familiar with that project and what we did, just real quickly here, the way that we did that and controlled for that was switching antlers. And
mm-hmm.
so taking the same buck and comparing two similar age or similar body size and artificially manipulating their antlers by working with an engineer and a coupler and all this sort of thing. And that way we could switch the antlers out on these bucks and
Yeah,
then assess a doe whether she was attracted to that buck or not.
yep.
That's how we manipulated that.
Yeah. And we were able to take two bucks the same age that one was big and one was small and have no antlers. And another two bucks that were different ages but the same body size and different pairs of all these different bucks. So we were able to really control it well. It was a well done study, scientific study. Um, But one things I learned early on, I don't know if you remember, but I basically took a fall semester trying to figure out how to make an artificial antler that we could coupling system that we could switch around. And I thought, well, heck, it's easy. I'll go buy some PVC pipe, and we just bondo it on to the cut antler stub, and then bondo the antlers into another piece of PVC and just stick it over it and screw it together. And PVC is not able to handle the significant strength of a buck. It won't work. And so we had, and Dan Marino came in, and he was, you know, uh, in construction for 10 years before he came. So he knew all about building things. And we went to the ag engineers and we said, all right, here's what we want. And they literally built these coupling systems that we designed. And it was really a fun project.
Yeah.
Really a fun project.
But it still comes back to where we started and what you had always said, that is not in any way, shape, or form saying that the doe, when she is in estrus, she is still going to breed with the buck that is available, that is tending with her.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like the doe is taking an active choice and shunning this younger buck and accepting the advances of an
Mm-hmm.
older buck. But all we demonstrated was, if a doe is an estrus with the way we set it up, and she did have a choice, if she were allowed to choose, she was far more predisposed to breeding with the buck with large antlers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And some of these follow-up ideas, I know we talked about at the time. Wouldn't it be great if, we could determine if the doe has some kind of internal mechanism that, she can actually affect with some probability which sperm actually implants the egg. Because a doe will get bred by multiple bucks. And we showed, Randy DeYoung's work showed that 25% of sets of twins are sired by different bucks. So clearly, most does are being bred by multiple bucks. So that was a really fun project. It was probably the most fun project I can think of having done here in Mississippi.
Yeah.
And then we got, other big, huge projects that were important to our state agency and the hunting public. Is our buck movement study in central Mississippi. And we've done versions of that in North Mississippi and in the Delta. Um, if you can quantify when and why and how bucks move across the landscape, that's pretty interesting stuff. And we've done some really great podcasts recently, and I think we still have a couple more coming up. So maybe we don't need to talk about that so much, but that was really, really important to do.
Yeah, no
And
doubt about it.
and if I may brag a little bit about the MSU Deer Lab, there's been movement studies done for 50 years across the country. I don't think there's a single study anywhere that's done the type of analysis that we have done to inform the hunting public about factors that affect buck movements. I mean, I put us up as the best at doing that with the data that we had.
Thank goodness we have good students.
Yes.
Because if it relied on you and I to crunch those numbers, it probably wouldn't happen.
Yes, and good coworkers.
Yeah.
That are smarter than either of us.
Yeah, and it's really just it's listening to hunters and listening to their questions, and I think so much. And if you listen to us yak on this podcast, you've heard us talk about this before, but the here today, gone tomorrow question, that whole deal of them shifting home ranges and looking at that and
Yes.
quantify. I mean, that literally was from trying to reconcile what we hear from hunters and what is the explanation with the data. And so that led to a very sophisticated analysis with the mobile personality and the sedentary personality, and about 30 to 33% of bucks exhibit that type of mobile behavior. And so we can't pat ourselves too much on the back. It's really just listening to hunters and trying our best to quantify the questions they ask.
Yep. And then letting the deer answer the questions for us.
Yeah.
And, I've always enjoyed, and I think there's a reason to say it, is never say never say always, because they're white-tailed deer. and they're going to do what they're going to do, and there'll probably be a good reason for doing it, even if it's not necessarily in their best interest at the time, but it's the best interest of the deer population moving forward, for these mobile bucks to go out across the landscape and have a greater chance of being shot or getting hit by a vehicle on the road or whatever. Uh, there's a benefit to deer to do that. Otherwise, it wouldn't exist.
Right.
And that's, anyway, what else we want to talk about? Goodness gracious. Oh, and talk about not being able to tap my brakes. That dang CWD came along towards the end of my career, and talk about needing information. That was a source of need, and how do we monitor for it? In particular, is some progress that we've made here at Mississippi State in cooperation with our cooperators at Minnesota and Wisconsin and USDA. A lot of quality people that helped us answer those questions to inform hunters.
Yep.
So,
and there's no good news.
No.
That's what really stinks about it is there's no, at least with our work, there's no breakthrough. It's really just trying. I don't know if you would describe it this way, Steve, but I think about the work we've done relative to CWD is how do we manage it? So how do we become more efficient at detecting it in the environment? How do we figure out what are the most likely places to find it? And so like some of the most recent research of looking at feeders, comparing that to food plots, comparing that to masting trees, etc. It's just quantifying where do you think we're going to see the reservoir of prions, the prevalence of prions. It's just really trying to do some pretty basic stuff. You and I aren't prion experts. We're not running a prion laboratory. That's not going to be a contribution that you and I could make or could have made. But it's just looking at kind of this real world. How do we help our state wildlife agency? How do we help hunters and managers deal with chronic wasting disease?
Yeah. Well, and what we learned, Miranda Huang led that group of projects, but what we learned was that we could search the environment and find it on the landscape prior to finding it in a deer population that has to wait to be harvested. When the disease first comes into an area, it's a very, very low prevalence. And your best chance of fighting a disease is when it's very, very early. And we showed a way to do that. And it's also a means of with finding it in scrapes. Bucks concentrate, urinate, saliva on the hanging branch. And so we're able to find it. And that's some state agencies that want to know where it is in the landscape from a regulatory standpoint have really gotten excited about this new methodology for monitoring the spread of the disease on the landscape without having to rely on, if it's there's 2 deer out of 100 deer in an area that have the disease, well, that's 2%. And what are the odds that one of those deer is going to be harvested and that deer is going to be taken in for sampling by the hunter? I mean, typically you don't find the disease on the landscape on a property until it's 5 or 6 or maybe 10% prevalence, because just the odds of finding it. And so this scrape study allowed us to prove a means of finding it early. And we actually found it in areas that subsequently they were finding it in deer populations, but we were able to give them an early warning signal. So that's a contribution to the management. Now, like you said, the downers, once it's there and embedded in the environment, it's just a matter of living with it and trying to figure out how to manage it. But, I still believe that the sooner you find a disease, the better you are in dealing with it, you can start implementing corrective strategies to minimize the spread of the disease. And the feeder study was also, led by Miranda. Uh, we put out feeders in a known CWD zone in Mississippi, special permit from the state agency to allow us to do that. They were brand new feeders, and we monitored them for presence of prions over time. And we found prions as quickly as 6 weeks after we put them out on brand new feeders. We found prions on the feeders. We also found prions on feeders that were only attended by raccoons because we excluded the deer. And so our presumption there, and it's indicative based on some follow-up research, is that the raccoons are getting the prions on their paws by being in muddy places and then climbing up on the feeder and getting, doing what they do with feeders. And then they get the prions on the feeder. So raccoons can physically spread the disease too, which really complicates the management of it. So we haven't come up with any solutions, but we've helped them monitor it and help them understand factors related to the disease. And if I can editorialize, yes, it is a real disease. It is nobody wanted that disease to be here. I did not want that disease to take up the majority of my mental capacity in the last 5 years of my career. I wanted to not have new projects. I wanted to just have a couple of years of doing research and writing things that I wanted to write. I ended up leaving without writing those papers that I wanted to write, but that's okay.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, MDWF&P, they did not want this disease either.
No.
Yeah.
No state agency would want this problem.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about something I thought you were going to bring up that you didn't. And maybe it is very, very low on your list. But at the time, I thought it would rank pretty high of accomplishments, and that is because it was a big deal to me, and it was learning and the training that took place with this research. It's one of those that put me on a different trajectory of how I think about managing a deer population, and specifically the buck segment of the deer herd, and that is the 4-point rule.
Oh, yeah.
Research that we did.
Yep. Well, and that was one of the things we used the DMAP database for early on, is to show that the 4-point rule, which was implemented by the state legislature of Mississippi during the 1990s to protect yearling bucks. The 4-point rule is going to protect, depending upon where you are, a very high prevalence, a high percentage of the yearling bucks in the population from harvest. And what you did and I'll let you just describe it because you led that research, but I guess since it's my retirement podcast, so I guess I'll describe it. But what you showed was that protecting smaller antlered yearling deer and allowing the harvest of larger antlered yearling deer actually degraded the cohort moving forward. The yearlings that turned into 2-year-olds, the 2-year-olds were now smaller than they were before the 4-point rule ever came into existence, and also transmitted up to the 3-year-olds. The 3-year-olds were smaller, and it was consistent. We looked at like 6 or 7 management areas across like 5 soil resource regions, and in every region we showed a statistically significant degradation of antler size at either the 2-year-old or the 3-year-old or both, from 5 to 10 inches smaller antlers, which, yeah, that's kind of mind-boggling that that's population level impacts of a selective harvest decision. So yeah, that was a fun project too, and it was impactful in that the legislature changed their rules. and the state agency changed the regulations. First, the legislature accepted, well, we probably shouldn't be creating the harvest regulations, so they allowed the agency to do that, and then the agency changed their regulations to a different approach to protecting young deer.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Essentially, at least this is the way I would describe it, which is not any different from the way you described it, but it showed the power of selective harvest and the directional selection of when you are, and we got to think back to the early 1990s when this was going on in mid 1990s, is it was rare to harvest 4 and 5 year old bucks. Most of the buck harvest was at 1 and 2 years of age.
Yeah.
And
80 or 90% of the harvest was yearlings back in the 80s.
So this is one of the cool things about ecology and no free lunch. And you got to think pros, cons, and how does this work was if we only harvest bucks with 4 or more points, that generally means that you're only harvesting older age bucks. Because at the time, when you're only harvesting yearlings and 2-year-olds, then they're only spikes and 3-year-olds, etc. So if we only harvest 4 points or more, then you're allowing the survival of those yearlings. So think about a yearling spike. You're allowing it to get to 2 to 3 years of age, where it now has 4, 5, 6, etc. points. But what we demonstrated was that rule did increase the age structure of the harvest. It did work in that regard. It did protect a bunch of yearlings and recruited them to 2 or 3 years of age. The flip side of that was that you are selectively removing the very best animals, for example, at the yearling age class. So there was no genetic changes that took place at all. It was simply taking the very best individuals and harvesting those very best individuals when they were really, really young. And then the younger animals that did not have the antler expression to be eligible for harvest until they were older.
Yeah.
And so that's how you saw the before and after of the 4-point rule of how are they older? You're saying the average age of the harvest is greater, but the average antler size is less. Well, that's how you do that, by manipulating the harvest and taking the very best animals when they're younger.
Yeah.
How that
and the comparison was pre 4-point rule and post 4-point rule, the same age.
right.
So the same cohort.
Right.
So we're able to say, yeah, there's the 2-year-olds and the 3-year-olds are smaller because of the 4-point rule.
Yeah, that's right.
And that was again another one of those. Boy, we did a lot of work in the early 2000s. Man. So, talk about trajectories. I mean, that also kind of led us on a trajectory about selective harvest in the other way of protecting the better quality younger bucks and how the standing crop can be improved through that. And we wrote a lot of articles for Quality Whitetails magazine and other magazines and showed through research that it could be done. And then we wrote our kind of collection of our management approach. What was the name of that book again?
Strategic Harvest System.
The rest, you came up with that catchy : how to break through
buck management's glass ceiling.
Yes,
I think.
There you go.
I can't remember exactly.
So, I mean, we quantified and described in, I think, very effective way for landowners, not scientists, but landowners and hunters to read and understand what we were recommending as a system of selective harvest management. It wasn't genetic management, it was cohort management.
Yeah.
That's often misunderstood, but we keep hammering that point. It's not genetics management, it's cohort.
that is what I meant of a couple minutes ago when a particular research project that we worked on really kind of changed the way I thought about how to manage buck harvest and what to do.
Mm-hmm.
And that is something that we still see today. That is, if not the number one problem, it is one of the greatest problems that we still see today. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
talking on really good, managed properties.
Yep.
Is that they're harvesting the wrong bucks. They're harvesting the best bucks too early in life. And so
Yep.
we're still seeing it was the same thing that took place with the yearling age class and shooting those yearlings that had 4 points. Now let's just move it up a few years to 3 years of age. And a 3-year-old that
Mm-hmm.
scores 135 inches,
Yep.
that buck gets killed. And so we see the same phenomenon. We just moved it up from the yearling to the 3-year-old. So
Yep.
it's still the same problem.
Yep. And there is a way to fix it. Uh, Again, it's scale and effectiveness, efficiency. Well, if you're on a small property, you can protect a buck, but he might move off of your property and get shot by a neighbor. So, it's hard to manage. But at the same time, if you have too large an area, particularly under a single landowner, they can't manage intensively enough over large areas. So, a large group of small property owners can really, really, through a cooperative management plan, really make hay.
Yeah.
And that's the cool thing. I guess, it's kind of sum up. Is there anything else I've left out that you think we need to talk about?
Probably. But
Yeah.
with a career so productive and expansive as yours, Steve, how
Oh,
could we
yes.
how
Oh,
could we
my goodness.
possibly cover everything?
Uh, we could have like a 5-volume set. um, but, really, we've done I think, a great job of learning new knowledge, putting it into context, especially with your leadership and the extension component, um, getting it out to people. Our podcast has done phenomenal. And have we announced the big news that we're over how many downloads?
Over 1 million downloads
Yeah.
and still climbing.
Yeah. So we should have these little clapping background noises, some clap, 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 clap. But yeah, I mean, to me, when you first dragged me into the world of podcasting 5 years ago, I it blows my mind. I never would have thought that we'd have 1 million downloads, and each episode's, an hour, and, not everybody listens to all of every episode, but goodness, that's 1 million hours of educational outreach to hunters and landowners and, anybody that wants to listen to it.
That's right.
So I, I am proud to have been part of your vision and bringing that to fruition.
And I remember, I don't remember every detail because I hate to correct you again. It wasn't 5 years ago, buddy.
Well, how many years ago
I
was it?
believe we started that in 2017.
Okay, that would be 8 years ago.
That'd be, yeah, that's 5 plus 3. Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
So
you
it's been a
taught me a
while.
lot about podcasts.
Not enough.
Not enough.
But
But yeah.
I remember you, again, I don't remember the details, but you kind of gave me this, okay, well, I don't understand this, and you didn't say it, but the look on your face and the tone was kind of like, I think this is really, really silly, but I'll appease you, and we're a team, so I'll go along with it. And you're probably in the back of your mind going, oh my gosh, he is bent on doing this, so I'll record a couple episodes with him, and hopefully it'll be a failure, and we'll be done with it, and we can go back to being productive. But But luckily you stuck with it, and it's been a really
Yep.
good thing. And it's something I am really, really proud of for the,
Hmm.
not it's not just the metrics of it, but I think it just really shows, and that's something we set out to do was, this is not a deer hunting podcast. There's a
Yeah.
whole bunch of really, really good, deer hunting podcasts. And, but this is all about teaching people about deer ecology and management. And
Hmm.
it's, at least at the time, that's one of the few places you could go and learn about these types of topics. So, I guess I'm very grateful to our audience that we've got people that listen to this type of stuff and appreciate it. And, so that's been very nice.
And I think if we want them to continue listening, we better wrap up pretty quick.
We probably should, because they're probably going to sleep on us here.
Yeah. This has been a great run. The best 27 years of my professional career has been working with you, Bronson, and all the wonderful students. And thank you for that. Um, Hope you'll let me get on a few more podcasts before we fully pull the plug off of my earphones.
Before we put you out to pasture without earphones, huh?
Yeah,
Without a
yeah.
microphone, I should say.
Before you start swiveling the switch,
Yeah.
I'm just going to mute Damaris. It doesn't matter if he starts to talk.
Or there goes Damaris again. And so at the control board, I'm just going to mute him here, and
Yeah.
we'll talk to other guests and say, he just likes to talk. We're going to let him talk and let him think he's talking into the microphone. Well, Steve, yeah, I'm not going to get all misty eyed here. I'm trying not to, but job well done. And
Yeah,
thank you for letting me be a part of it.
Well, I couldn't have done it without you, buddy.
The feeling is entirely mutual. So thank you for everything you've done, and best of luck. Again, you're going to be part of this, maybe not as much as you were in the past, but in the near future, be part of this, making contributions. And whenever we are seeking that wise, sage advice, we will give you a call, and we'll actually make your microphone live.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you all very much. Thank you for listening. And Steve, once again, thanks for everything.
One last. Now, this is coming into late spring, and this might be my last time to say this, but coming into late spring, the does are in late gestation. The nutritional quality of lactation, demands of lactation is going to be sky high. What are you doing to your property right now, and preferably over the previous couple of years, to make sure that your does have the nutrition that they need to support late gestation and early lactation?
All right. Well, there's Steve, always teaching, going out with a bang, giving us something to do. So, all right. Thanks, Steve, and we will talk to you soon.
We thank the Patrick F. Taylor Foundation and the St. John and Dudley Hutchinson families for their endowed financial support of our efforts.
We also thank our employers, the Mississippi State University Extension Service and the Forest and Wildlife Research Center. If you have questions or suggestions, please log on to msudeerlab.com and click on the Deer University tab.